So the last few weeks, we have been tracing our tour route on the Best of the Med tour. And it begins in Barcelona, way over here in the north part of Spain, and spends a couple of days in Barcelona. We then go into to the south of France through Provence and the Côte d'Azur. So we visit the little medieval town of Carcassonne, Arles, Aix, Bonneau, and Nice. And we've kind of chronicled that experience the last couple of weeks if you want to go back and look at the archives and see those. And tonight we're hopping on a train in Nice and taking the train across the seaside of Italy. And we're arriving in one of our favorite destinations, the Cinque Terre. Now the Cinque Terre is 5 little villages on the Ligurian Sea. And let me get this. So we have, from the top going down, we have Monterosso al Mare, Vernazza, Cornelia, Manarola, and Rio Maggiore. And all of those little towns are nestled into a little river hamlet that spills into the ocean. And these towns throughout the Middle Ages have built up on those rivers. And so they're just quaint little towns that until 30 years ago were quite undiscovered. And then tourism took off and several travel writers began writing about them. And until COVID-19 hit, they were packed all the time with many, many tourists and tour boats and everything else. So we're thinking that based on the comments I've heard from people that are living in the Cinque Terre, things have slowed down quite a bit. There are some tourists there now, but mostly Europeans. And so when I get there next month, you can bet I'll be doing a Travel Talk Tuesday from the Cinque Terre live. So I just wanted to make sure you know that as well. Now, let me run this just a bit because in the Cinque Terre, there's several types of cuisine that is important. And one is the pesto, which grows in the region. Actually, it's not the pesto, but it's the basil that grows in the region. And that basil is all over the place in this region of Italy known as Liguria. Just like Tuscany is a state, Liguria is a state as well. And in Liguria on the seaside, this basil just grows like crazy and is harvested. So that basil is taken with and mixed in a mortar and pestle with pine nuts and olive oil and some cheese, pecorino cheese, some sheep cheese, and it's mixed all together and it makes this concoction of pesto. So that's the first thing I want to show you and talk to you about. And this little recipe may be a repeat for some of you who've watched before. And the second one I want to talk about is seafood, which I'll show you after this pesto demonstration. So it'll take just a minute. Here we go.
Pesto lasagna is one of my favorite dishes when visiting the Cinque Terre. This recipe includes mixing these ingredients together to make the green pesto sauce, which includes a couple of plants of basil, that's 1/2 of your ingredients. 50 grams of pine nuts have been toasted, that's another 1/4 of your ingredients. And then 40 grams of Parmesan cheese, which is another 1/4 of your ingredients. All of that is combined together with a clove of garlic, some olive oil, a lemon zest and lemon juice, and salt and pepper to taste. You mix it together in a mortar and pestle or blender, and you come up with the sauce you see here. Next, I boiled about 8 sheets of lasagna pasta for about 8 minutes in boiling water and laid it out on the counter to kind of drain and dry, and it will be used as a base. There is a white sauce called bechamel that is used as well, and it consists of a 1/2 stick of melted butter, and once it's melted, you put 50 grams of flour in there, mix it around, and this becomes the roux, and then you add into it a bay leaf, about 28 ounces of warmed whole milk, freshly grated nutmeg is sprinkled on at the end. And you can season it up near the end once you taste it with the nutmeg, a dash or 2 of vinegar, some salt, and some pepper until it tastes great. If the sauce comes out to be a little lumpy, there's no problem with taking it dipping it in a blender to smooth it all out and make it nice and creamy and velvety. But here you see I'm putting milk into this roux I've made. This is a little bit lumpy, so I did go ahead and put it, use the stick mixer to put it in there. And this is what I ended up with. It's boiling, looks really great. I put a couple of drops of vinegar in there to add a little bite to it, and then again the nutmeg and salt and pepper at the end. Then I layered 4 sheets of the cooked pasta at the bottom of the pan, spread on the pesto sauce, followed by the bechamel sauce, and that was the first layer. And then put on another layer of pasta once that was done, and put another layer of pesto and bechamel, and then 1/3 layer the same way. Then finally I put the bechamel on the top layer, and then sprinkled on the nutmeg and pine nuts, and the Parmesan cheese went on the top of it, and I'm going to put it in the oven and bake at about 375 degrees.
Sorry about the video quality.
I'm David McGuffin, and today we're exploring the Cinque Terre on Italy's rugged Mediterranean coast. Cinque Terre. In English, that means the 5 lands. And it's a loose-knit community of 5 villages connected together by trails and by the sea. For centuries, people have etched out a living here, either by fishing, working the vineyards, or raising crops. Each village has its own character, its own local people, and its own dialect.
No.
You can see we were here, it was cold, no swimming for sure. And this gentleman and his wife are showing us the herbs that they just picked from their garden as they're going back home to the house. Timo is thyme, rosmarino is rosemary, basilico is basil. So back in 2008, my Italian wasn't all that great, so it took me a while to do that.
Monterosso al Mare is the largest of the 5 Cinque Terre villages. It's really 2 villages in one, with an old town and a new town, separated by a mountain. There's a pedestrian tunnel.
Even today, when we visit the Cinque Terre, we usually set up camp in Monterosso.
In the Middle Ages, this was the castle area of Monterosso al Mare. There was a fort here, and it's where the people would run to when pirates would invade the area. Today, it's a monastery, and this path here is called the Switchback of the Monks. Behind me is the local cemetery.
The Church of the Capuchin monks sits near the cemetery. Inside, you'll find this impressive altarpiece painting of St. Francis, as well as a painting by the Dutch master Van Dyck, who lived and worked for many years in nearby Genoa. We're in the oldest part of Monterosso. In the Middle Ages, this cemetery would have been within the castle walls, tucked safely behind the hills and out of the view of invading pirates. Even today, the cemetery is a sacred place. The local citizens keep it tidy and decorated with fresh flowers, as well as black and white memento photographs of their lost loved ones. Here, at the summit, are the graves of some of Monterosso's most famous priests. Rio Maggiore. In English, that means major river. And up until about 30 years ago, the river ran down through the middle of town where you see Main Street today.
Well, we've reached the top of town. The elevator was a good ride up here.
I could have walked the stairs from the train station below, but my Cinque Terre card allowed free use of the town's elevator. During During the Middle Ages, Rio Maggiore's inhabitants lived in the hills, which offered protection from raiders traveling by sea. By the way, doing the laundry hasn't changed much in those 900 years. Getting cash here in the Cinque Terre or anywhere in Europe is the same way. We use our ATM debit card, just like you use at home. Insert in the machine just like we would do at home. It asks you what language you'd like. English, Italian. I'll choose English. Punch in your PIN code. And then choose the amount of money that you'd like to draw out. I've chosen to draw out 250 euro. Take your money and receipt. So it spits out euro cash, and our bank at home will do the conversion and take it out of my checking account at home. This entire area is designated as a national park. And so the Italian government has soaked funds into the area to preserve its antiquated style. So we have to do a Cinque Terre pass to go into the paths. Okay, grazie. The Via dell'Amore, the pathway of love. If you're not into hiking and want to experience the Cinque Terre, you need to take a walk on the Via dell'Amore. It's a short 20-minute level stroll between the villages of Rio Maggiore and Manarola. Ah, the easy life of travel. Graffiti wall of the Via dell'Amore, the walkway of love. David and Charlotte. Italy.
There's a sad part of this story in that the Via dell'Amore and many of the trails that connect the villages are no longer there, or else they're there but are unusable because back in 2013 in October, there was a terrible rainstorm that came across the Cinque Terre, which triggered mudslides all up and down these mountains. And the mudslides came into the town of Vernazza and into the town of Monterosso especially, and kind of obliterated the main streets in the town and everything else. And they also washed out a lot of these trails. So the Via dell'Amore, which was from the first village, Rio Maggiore, to Manarola, which was basically flat and paved all the way, we've not been able to walk on it since 2013. Maybe one day when the Italian government gets their act together and funds some national park services and whatnot, then that will be repaired. But I don't expect it'll happen anytime soon. So that's probably the only footage you see from me that I'm going to have on the Via dell'Amore.
Be famous for its gelato, but Europe is famous for the Magnum bar. That's what I travel here for. There's nothing like it. Magnum Classico. Buongiorno.
Com'è?
Sì, sì. Beautiful. Grazie, signore.
Oh.
This is good. The Magnum bar. Yeah. You got to try one. We're ending our day in Cornelia, and this is La Ristorante La Terna. And Katie and I are sampling the antipasto di mare, La Casa. And, ecco.
Fegato di tonno affumicato, pesce tonno affumicato, pesce spada affumicato, insalata di mare, gamberi e fagioli, acciughe d'olive, acciughe di limone.
So there are 10 dishes there, and none of them are really, they're not raw, but they're not hot either. And I love this antipasto di mare, but not many people do. I know Charlotte doesn't like it at all. So when I'm in the Cinque Terre and with a group of people, I can at least order it for everybody, and we can all have a little sample or not. But if you've got an octopus sitting up there or a calamari sitting up there with his eyes looking at you and that kind of stuff, it's not great. Or a chughe, what's the chughe? Anchovies, yeah, anchovies. I always want to say sardines. Anchovies that are not cooked very much, but they're in oil. It's I love it, but a lot of people, that's not their cup of tea.
So we have a little bit of everything. Lechuga, thank you very much. Thank you. Anchovies. Yes, thank you. What do you think? What'd you have? I'm gonna have the achuga. This is achuga limone.
That little fish with lemon.
That's the best anchovy I've ever had. Did you eat it all? Yeah, that anchovy right there. Try that. It's not like an anchovy in a can.
Okay, right now we have glasses of sakacha and contucci. This is like biscotti. What you do is you take the contucci and you dip it in the sakacha. Everyone knows. You dip it for a few seconds and then it soaks up and you eat it. It's really sweet. Or you can just drink it. It's better that way. It's very good.
So you hear in the background, I'll continue sharing that. A few years back, we took a choir from Niceville, Florida, and they were singing in the church here in Vernazza. The church here in Monterosso Amare. And this is one of the student conductors, but just listen to the music, echoing, resonating. So we do quite a few performing groups throughout Europe. I'm going to show, we've got a little Italian antipasti here, and this is would be considered the primi piatti made, or the antipasta, I guess, probably the antipasta, yeah, antipasta. And it is cantaloupe and prosciutto, and Italy is called prosciutto e melone. And this cantaloupe is okay. And the prosciutto is okay, not like what you would usually get in Liguria and the Cinque Terre. But you'll find this in the summertime, especially on the menu of every restaurant. So Charlotte and I are kind of munching on that. You can if you want to try it out. So basically, in the Cinque Terre, it's shrimp, mussels, clams, all put together with tomatoes and some, as I mentioned, the sea salt and some oregano and olives, black olives from the region. And you cook it all up, and then you put it over, you cook your pasta as well until it's about 10 minutes, until it's al dente. And then you dump the pasta in this pan, heat it all up, and it's ready to serve. Al fresco, very, very fresh, ready to go. So I've got it kind of halfway prepared, and when we finish tonight, I'll get the pasta in the water, and we'll do it like that. I'll take a couple of photos and let you look at it on a later thing. But this is called spaghetti choc, or spaghetti with seafood. Now, a lot of the dishes in Liguria also have spaghetti as the base, but it could be spaghetti and clams in a white wine and olive oil sauce. Is very, very popular. And so is mixed fried seafood as well. So those are some things to look for in the Cinque Terre. Hey, Charlotte, why don't you tell them about your experience with the conductor on the train while I get this back going? You want to come over here and tell them? she's got a mouthful of prosciutto.
Yeah.
I think.
David just mentioned the fact that you have to validate your ticket. And so I was there with a couple of people. David didn't happen to be with us at the moment. And we were traveling back to Monterosso. And unfortunately, I had forgotten to validate our ticket. And the conductor came by and asked me for the ticket. And when he looked at it, he said, that will be €50 and your passport. So 50 euro later, we made it back to Monterosso, but it's very important to validate your ticket.
Then you say all the people with you pointed to you. And
oh,
said,
yeah. Whenever the conductor asked for the tickets, they all pointed at me. And because I was holding the group ticket, unfortunately. So anyway, it's a funny story now, but it wasn't so funny at the time.
So I think I'm sharing now.
In a short amount of time.
Right.
Once you're situated and seated in the train, it's comfy all the way. But there are a couple of things that you need to know. First of all, it helps to get your tickets ahead of time. Once you do have your ticket, you need to validate it in a little box. You should pack light. Carry a smaller carry-on size suitcase because you will have to carry that from the platform into the train and lift it above your head just like on an airline and put it there. For us traveling on these trains, we have an opportunity to interact with people. We encountered a lady who wanted to engage us in conversation and to speak English because she was practicing and learning her English. So it's a fun opportunity to engage and to try out some communication skills that you might not be willing to do if you weren't right there in the environment. Some of the trains have a dining car in it that you can go and get your lunch or dinner, but I much more prefer to, at the station before you leave, stop and pick up a cheap picnic. So I've got a caprese sandwich here, a Diet Coke, a couple of crackers and chips, and this one made for a great dining experience and with the scenery and whatnot, so that when we reach our destination, we can hit the ground running. So I'm going to eat lunch, I think. So your adventure starts right here with David McGuffin's Exploring Europe. So salute from Italy.
So I'm going to let us continue running so I won't mess up anything. And these were some experiences we filmed back in 2014, I think. So we're looking forward to experiencing the Cinque Terre again.
The village of Monterosso is a great place to start your adventure here on the Cinque Terre. This is the first of the 5 villages. So we have Monterosso, and then behind me, the next village down in the sunlight is Vernazza, which will be our next destination. Let's check out Monterosso. All right, so we walked around the point. Now there's a tunnel down here on the left that connects the old and new town, but this is the old town of Monterosso. The old towns have definitely a lot more charm, but it's very convenient and a little bit more modern to stay in Monterosso in the new town. So the path we're walking up is going up the mountain to the cemetery and to the monastery above Monterosso. And you can tell I'm puffing and puffing a little bit. In English, it's called the switchback of the friars. Italian is the Z dei Frati. And we'll come up on, in a moment, a bronze statue of St. Francis, which looks out over the Ligurian Sea in Monterosso. So this is the Capuchin Monastery of St. Francis. So you see the black and white facade, and looking out, this beautiful cross right in front of the vineyards. And there used to be quite a few friars up here. There's only one that takes care of the entire village. This is a nice refuge from what could be a crowded town down below. Okay, we've reached the old town here in Monterosso, and it's loaded with character. All of these villages have little wine shops and cafes and meat shops. There's a butcher shop beside me. This is one of the main squares here, and as you can see, some of the locals are gathering here to chat and talk. It's about noon, so they're getting ready to go eat some lunch and take their siesta. So we're heading back to the next village, to Vernazza, so let's go. All right, we're at the train station in Monterosso, and if we're heading in the direction toward La Spezia, back toward Pisa, then the trains are always going to be on the track that's closest to the mountainside. And if you're heading the direction toward here, Monterosso or Levanto, the trains will always be on the ocean side. That's a very important point for catching the correct train going in the right direction here in the Cinque Terre. It's also very important to realize that at some of the train stations, you're actually...
One important point about this Best of the Med tour, this happens to be the only tour where we stay for 3 days and 3 nights in the Cinque Terre. My other 2 tours that go to the Cinque Terre are 2 days, which are adequate, and you get to have a whole 3 day. But with this Best of the Med tour, you get the last 3 days of your tour there. You do a little orientation on 1 day, and then you have 2 days to experience all of that on your own and with our assistance too, if you want to as well.
Tunnel, like here in Vernazza. So when the train stops, even though you don't see the station, you need to go ahead and get off. A good rule of thumb is to keep account of the villages that you want to visit and know if it's village 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and how many stops it is to get there. Okay? A very important thing that happened here on October 25th, 2011. This village was flooded, and a big mudslide came down the mountain and covered this town with 10 or 12 feet of mud all the way down the road to the harbor. It all came right down here, and this was filled up way up to the 2nd floor. I was here last September, and a friend of mine that owns a restaurant told me that they had just opened 6 weeks ago, and that was after 2011. For me, this is a quintessential town here in the Cinque Terre. I love to hike out through here and grab a place on a rock out here and just chill out on the harbor all day long. These places, although it looks uncomfortable, you can put a towel down and nestle yourself amongst these rocks. I can't count how many times I've done this route right here. So we're going to try a little GoPro experiment here in the water. If I can get down here without getting sopping wet. It is a bit cold. Here we go. This is fun. The next village down is called Manarola. I really like Manarola because it's a village on the sea, but it's not quite so touristy. So the harbor here in Manarola is a little bit different than the other harbors in that it's down about 150 feet. And so in order to get the boats from the harbor up here where they're all parked, there's a mechanical lift here that they go down and you pull the boats up and it parks here overnight. And in the morning they drop them back down, go out fishing, come back and do the same thing over and over again. And now it's kind of a swanky thing, electric, but it used to be by hoist. And so they've done this for centuries for the harbor in Manarola. These dried spices are pretty good to take back home. They're lightweight and they're packed heavy with a lot of flavor. So every time I come here, I try to get 4 or 5 of them to take home. They'll last me 6 months or so. One says for hot spaghetti and bruschetta and oil and peppers. So we'll see. then you can actually walk through the vineyards where for centuries they've had these terraces there that have gardens and olive groves and grapevines on them, and walk through the entire town, and it's a great experience. Okay, I'm pausing because we need a breather here, but we've hiked up from the harbor, and now we're walking up some steps through the vineyards and going to take a little tour through the vineyards that ultimately winds up at the top of the town here of Manarola. So this is an example of how people would get to the stone walls and to the vineyards up there. So they see they put these steps. You go up here, crawl up here, and then you're on one of those terraces. There's vineyards every which way. But in order to pick them, you have to get on your hands and knees underneath there and pick them. So it's a tough row-to-hoe job to pick here in the Cinque Terre. We've made our way to the top of the vineyards here and haven't seen a soul. So it's worthwhile making the climb to get up here and to experience the peace and quiet. 5:30. So at 45 minutes after hour, it dings 3 times. At quarter after hours, 1 time. Then the hour, it dings however many hours it is. I love staying in these villages because, you never even have to wear a watch. You can just listen to the church bell. That means it's time to knock off what you're doing and go have a glass of wine. I don't know. Finally, the last village in my sequence of things is the village of Rio Maggiore. I really like Rio Maggiore as well because when I go on vacation and I'm not leading tours or semi-working, we stay in the village of Rio Maggiore, way up above town, and I so much enjoy meeting the people in town, going to the store every morning and buying some fresh produce, visiting the fish truck that shows up in the mornings, and it's just a great time. So Rio Maggiore warms some time as well. In the Cinque Terre, you cannot just go to one village and get the entire taste of the region. They all have a different character. They all have a different group of people, and they're all totally different from one another. So you'll miss out if you don't experience all the villages in the Cinque Terre.
Okay, back full screen here. I'll wrap this up. So again, the last 3 days of our Best of the Med tour ends up in the Cinque Terre. And there's that train that runs from village to village that takes you 3 to 5 minutes from one destination to other. You can walk. It takes an hour and a half or so from a couple of the villages. As I mentioned earlier, some of the trails are no longer passable. But you can also take a boat that goes through all of the villages on the Ligurian Sea and stops everywhere except in the village of Cornelia. So a lot to see, do, and experience there. And so this kind of wraps up my chronicling our Best of the Med tour, which began way back to the west in Barcelona, went to the south of France, and ends up in the Cinque Terre. After the last day, we basically get on the train and head to Pisa. And there's an airport there where it has connections all the way back to the United States and the rest of Europe and everything else. So that's how all that kind of plays out. So with that, I'm going to leave it at that and sign off for tonight. But we're going to enjoy this great meal from the Cinque Terre, spaghetti choc. And thank you again. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye now.